I think Agnes was an eye-opener for generations to come.
It's been 50 years since one of the deadliest natural disasters in Pennsylvania history.
Water was over the spillway by about 1.5 feet.
But as we continue to see more and more tropical activity in the Commonwealth,
Agnes back in 1972 was categorized as about a 1,000-year flood event.
We're now seeing those with a 10-year return period. So they've gotten 10 times more frequent.
What have we learned since to prepare us for the next Agnes?
If a storm did that, it would be Agnes on steroids.
It's not a question of whether or not it will happen again. It's really a certainty.
Hi, I'm Chief Meteorologist of WNEP-TV, Kurt Aaron.
And I'm Chief Meteorologist from Fox 43, Braden Long. It's been 50 years since Hurricane Agnes struck Pennsylvania and the Mid-Atlantic as a whole, one of the deadliest natural disasters for the Mid-Atlantic.
Absolutely, and that's why we put this show together. We're going to cover a lot of topics in this show, like the history of Agnes, how it completely changed our area. We're also going to look at climate change, how that impacted our region, and we're going to look at the weather-wise. Why did Agnes happen? And then the other question is, with our infrastructure, could it happen again? We're going to answer those topics as we take a trip down memory lane, so please join us. Imagine for a moment a flood where the water was so powerful it caused cemeteries to give up their dead. Hundreds of corpses moving into unsuspected neighborhoods where people had no idea the dead were returning. It would be like a scene from a horror movie. Unfortunately, this wasn't a movie. It was a tragic reality for some Pennsylvanians living along the Susquehanna River in the summer of 1972. Hurricane Agnes, aka the Big One, it intensified over the Gulf of Mexico in mid-June 1972. After making landfall across the southeast U.S., it began moving out to sea on the 21st, before suddenly changing course and heading for our region on the 22nd, and settled over Pennsylvania and upstate New York and New Jersey on the 23rd as a tropical storm. Agnes is remembered as one of the wettest tropical cyclones on record for Pennsylvania because parts of our region received up to 18 inches of rain. This caused flooding at a scale never seen before. Even the president at the time, Richard Nixon, came to see the carnage.
This is the big one. It completely changed the landscape physically. It literally changed the way certain areas were. It changed the look of them.
Thanks to Agnes, sections of the Wyoming Valley in the Wilkes-Barre area were washed away. But it wasn't just here in northeastern Pennsylvania. Our state capital, Harrisburg, places like Shipoke, where residents were living on the lowest floodplain in the entire city. That section was completely destroyed. The Cameron Street corridor was inundated with water thanks to Agnes and the Paxton Creek. Also, northern Harrisburg, where the governor's mansion, they were not spared. But the northern branch of the Susquehanna River in Wilkes-Barre was particularly brutal.
My dad and I used to say we rode down to corner Dennison and Wyoming Avenue and saw the caskets floating down.
Can you imagine having to wade through floodwater containing hundreds of corpses? Northeastern Pennsylvania was hit really hard by Agnes back in '72. Our very own meteorologist, Allie Gallo, sat down with a familiar face, Mike Stevens, who's been doing On the Pennsylvania Road for over 30 years. He remembers what he saw the time Agnes hit our region.
Around this time every year, Mike Stevens says the same few memories always come to mind. He thinks about this cemetery in 44 and all of the graves that were washed away. He thinks about his childhood home here in Swoyersville, the house his father was still living in and which he had to flee from in 1972. He thinks about the smell of diesel fuel and sewage, a scent he would encounter going to work every day in the aftermath. And he thinks about all of the people he met and the stories they told him even months after the flood.
And can't tell you how many people cried on camera, not because of they wanted to do it, but because we brought back memories of what they had lost, how their houses were gone now, just piles of junk, piles of debris, all the things that they loved, all the pictures, all the mementos of life, gone.
Mike was working in radio in June of 1972 and was just starting to freelance for TV. In the immediate aftermath of the flood, he recalls the job as a lot of public service announcements, such as who needs to leave their homes and where to get food and shelter. But Mike says that was just the beginning of the Agnes flood story.
How do you feel, Mr., Mrs.? How do you feel? What do you think? This is going to be bad, isn't it? Yeah, it's going to be real bad. Well, what are you going to do now? And they would go on and tell you.
Mike says it was impossible to comprehend at the time just how big a deal Agnes was. Back then, he took things day by day. But now, 50 years later, he realizes what those stories each day added up to.
You know, we gave people an outlet, I think. We gave them an outlet. Someplace to talk. Because it was tough. It was tough. Even after all these years, you know, I look back and think, boy.
Welcome back. You just saw what our area looked like 50 years ago, but how exactly did we get there? How did we get that much rainfall, and what tools did meteorologists have to even forecast the event?
Yeah, thankfully I had a great history lesson on the perspective of what it was like trying to forecast that storm, and we're going to hear from the man in the backyard at the time from WNEP, Jay Christopher.
It didn't just break the record, Agnes shattered all the records.
Before Agnes became a record-shattering storm, it got its start as a tropical depression over the Yucatan Peninsula on June 14th.
By the 16th, on that Friday, Agnes was named the first tropical storm of the 1972 hurricane and tropical storm season.
Dave Nicosia is the meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service office in Binghamton. He's done extensive research on Agnes and tells us that the path of destruction started long before it reached Pennsylvania.
A very heavy rain fell in western Cuba, and they had a lot of flash flooding, and there was deaths. There was deaths in Cuba. So a very wet system, and that's very important as we go forward.
Agnes became a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico on Sunday, June 18th.
By the 20th, Agnes makes landfall on the peninsula of Florida, and then rapidly was downgraded to a tropical storm.
Despite being more than 1,000 miles away, rain associated with Agnes arrived later that night.
There was a cold front on Tuesday night, the 20th, that stalled over western New York as Agnes was coming up through the southeast United States. And the tropical moisture from Agnes got drawn into that front and dumped anywhere from up to 8 inches of rain in the Chemung River Basin.
It was just one of those moments you can't forget.
Jay Christopher worked in a variety of roles for us at WNEP.
But I had a hat on, it said weather.
Jay was our man in the backyard in June of 1972.
We did the weather outside, and I had magnetized things that I put on the piece of metal.
Even 50 years later, Jay vividly remembers what it was like trying to get to work through a driving rain on June 21st.
I went to work, it was on a Wednesday, and I went to work. I didn't know if I was going to get home that evening because things were already getting very tenuous.
During the day, Wednesday and Wednesday night, you bring all this rain north and you get the rest of the Susquehanna Basin. You go over with more rain now in the Chemung Basin, which already was hit hard.
Rain that falls into the Chemung River Basin drains into the Susquehanna River. So all of that heavy rain, plus all of the water draining from the headwaters of the Susquehanna River, came down all throughout northeastern and central Pennsylvania. Despite low water levels at the time, things changed quickly.
But we didn't know exactly how fast it was going to come up. Nobody really knew. But the only thing that was known then was that the dike was not going to hold.
They saw the headwater gauges all the way up in the upper basin, in the Chemung River Basin, at record level. They were like, oh no.
Heavy rain continued through the day, Thursday the 22nd, as Agnes re-intensified back into a tropical storm off of the New Jersey coast before cutting back west over northwestern Pennsylvania and raining itself out by Friday the 23rd. The Susquehanna River was quickly rising.
Agnes proved that within one day the river can go up 20 feet.
Primitive weather models at the time gave forecasters the general track of the storm, but they were very poor at projecting future rainfall.
The River Forecast Center back in those days did not incorporate future rainfall into their model.
Since rainfall forecasts weren't reliable and river levels were low, meteorologists weren't as concerned about the rivers as they were about the smaller creeks and streams.
They were talking about the small streams and creeks. The rivers, they didn't think they were going to be able to come up this high.
As we now know, the Susquehanna River crested at historic levels above flood stage up and down the entire river.
When the dike finally was breached, the sirens were blaring, and everybody knew that the flood was upon us.
Now the question is, can we expect to see flooding of this magnitude again in the future?
The possibility of tropical cyclones reaching this far north and being more intense and producing Agnes level of flooding, widespread flooding, is something we're contemplating.
Hi, and welcome back to our show. You know, it's been 50 years since Agnes impacted our region. But Agnes isn't the only system. We've had many tropical systems that have impacted Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvanians will remember Lee in 2011, Ida, Isaias, and Fred of the last 2 years as well. No stranger to increased tropical activity. But scientists are concerned that warming ocean waters due to climate change could make events like Agnes not only happen more frequently, but with more intensity.
Storms that used to be called 100-year return period storms, storms that we wouldn't typically see at that intensity for a century, we're now seeing those with a 10-year return period. So they've gotten 10 times more frequent.
Dr. James Kinter III leads the Center for Ocean Land Atmosphere Studies and is a professor of climatology at George Mason University. In the ongoing climate change discussion, the ocean provides one of the biggest concerns for the future.
The ocean temperatures are warming, so the energy source is increasing.
It takes a long time for ocean waters to warm up as they store increasing amounts of carbon dioxide, but scientists say we're already seeing the effects.
If we get storms, tropical storms, and if they make landfall in North America, they're going to cause more damage. There's going to be more rainfall, potentially producing more catastrophic flooding. There's going to be more severe wind, potential tornadoes being spawned on the edges of the tropical cyclone. So all in all, the damage potential is much, much higher.
Warmer temperatures overall in the ocean means that waters off the mid-Atlantic have more energy too. In addition to an increase in strength, scientists say the paths of tropical storms are shifting.
Typically they form either in the tropical Atlantic or in the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and they slowly drift to the north, and then either they make landfall and dissipate, or they go out to sea in the Atlantic and dissipate. The problem what we're seeing is that they're getting farther and farther north over time, and that's a detectable significant trend in the northward extent of tropical cyclones. So that's troublesome here in the mid-Atlantic.
What we are seeing is evidence of changing climate.
Kelton Halbert is a doctoral student at the University of Wisconsin. His specialty includes thunderstorms, supercells, and tornadoes. New data in his field also impacts tropical storms.
More heat content, you can also hold more moisture in the atmosphere.
The number of days with enough energy in the atmosphere for thunderstorm development has increased in parts of the Mid-Atlantic. That means that we are warmer with more moisture more often, 40 more days every year with storm potential. That's near the top of the list in all of North America.
In the case of tropical cyclones, they're essentially very large, severe thunderstorms. They take advantage of the availability of water vapor in the atmosphere. That's adding to the available potential energy of tropical cyclones.
That also means Pennsylvania plays part in an environment more suitable for a storm like Agnes to survive.
We're going to have much more sustained thunderstorm development as tropical cyclones make landfall, and so you'll see impacts further inland because it takes longer for it to weaken.
Storms like Agnes used to be the anomaly.
It maintained its strength to a very high latitude, got very far north at a high level of strength. And that's just because it picked this beautiful path, beautiful and tragic at the same time, beautiful path right over the Chesapeake Bay. And so it had access to warm water much farther inland and much farther north.
And if a storm today with more potential energy took a similar track,
it would be Agnes on steroids. It would be just a much more difficult storm to deal with than any of the storms we've experienced since then.
Coming up.
It's not a question of whether or not it will happen again. It's really a certainty.
50 years later, what have we learned to better protect ourselves should a storm like Agnes strike again?
Welcome back. From the Wyoming Valley Levee System to Indian Rock Dam down south, flooding from Hurricane Agnes put flood mitigation infrastructure to the test.
And since then, we've seen improvements both in technology and infrastructure that will hopefully help us weather the next storm a little bit better.
Indian Rock Dam in York County started operating in 1942 and has been put to the test over the years. The flooding from Hurricane Agnes in 1972 was by far the biggest test the dam has stood up to.
So Agnes, the water was over that spillway.
So in Hurricane Agnes, water was over the spillway by about 1.5 feet. We have a side discharge concrete spillway.
Steve Young, head dam operator for Indian Rock Dam, says the reservoir saw a dramatic increase in water during the event.
On the 21st of June, it was 15.57, the reservoir elevation. On the 22nd of June, it was 64.54 feet and rising. So it's a dramatic difference.
The flooding from Agnes was the first and only time Indian Rock Dam has seen spillway flow. Indian Rock Dam is just one of many flood mitigation projects in place across Pennsylvania. From dams to levees, reservoirs, and more, there are multiple groups that have flood mitigation at top of mind. One of those groups is the Susquehanna River Basin Commission.
I think Agnes was an eye-opener for generations to come. It certainly was unprecedented here in this area.
Ben Pratt, a water resources engineer, says one of the big improvements in flood preparation has come upstream.
The other thing we didn't have during Agnes were flood control reservoirs. So we had some in place, but there were some that were built after Agnes that have had a significant impact in terms of reducing flood risk in the upper parts of the Susquehanna.
From the Susquehanna itself to its tributaries, like the Codorus Creek, flooding from Agnes occurred at all levels.
Agnes back in 1972 was categorized as about a 1,000-year flood event through the Codorus Creek area and a lot of the surrounding areas as well.
Alex Baldowski is the Levee Safety Program Manager for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Baltimore District. He says that the levees around the Codorus in downtown York were overtopped in many cases. This, combined with interior flooding, resulted in the devastating flooding the city experienced. Since then, Baldowski says a lot has changed around the levees.
Over the past few years, the Army Corps has received about $15 or $16 million to make repairs to the Codorus Creek project. One of them here is the Penn Street flood wall. It's almost 600 feet of flood wall replacement, and it ties out with the Penn Street Bridge over here. And there are other improvements to be made along the way, such as rehabilitating conduits.
Earlier this year, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Baltimore District announced it would receive $62 million in supplemental funding. Some of this funding goes towards the Codorus Creek project and Indian Rock Dam. The Wyoming Valley Levee project also received over $11 million in support of flood risk mitigation, benefiting the communities of Plymouth, Kingston, Edwardsville, Hanover, Wilkes-Barre, and more. In addition to building and maintaining flood infrastructure across Pennsylvania, improving technologies are also a big help these days.
Our forecasting capabilities 50 years ago were not nearly what they are today. We have access to far more data now, and so we're better able to understand and predict events like Agnes.
Advancements in internet, cell phones, and other technology now allows both government organizations and people at home to be aware of the forecast well in advance, plus have the tools to properly react.
If you're an individual that lives in a floodplain, it's very much your own responsibility to take the necessary actions that you need to protect your own life and property.
The Susquehanna River Basin Commission has joined forces with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and other groups to form the Silver Jackets. The group is an interagency team that comes together to reduce flood risk and damages.
We come up with solutions and projects to implement that can hopefully help reduce flood risk.
One of those projects is the Susquehanna Flood Warning and Response System. This tool for Wyoming Valley officials and emergency managers provides flood inundation data so they are better able to prepare for flooding at different levels. It's a project they hope to expand in the future. Between improvements in infrastructure, technology, and interagency teamwork, experts say we are in a better position to handle flooding today, though there are still things that need to be done.
It's not a question of whether or not it will happen again. It's really a certainty. Mother Nature will always one-up herself. I've learned that over my years in the business. And so with that, we can certainly expect to see another type of Agnes event, whether that's going to be next week, next month, or in 100 years. That's the question.
Pennsylvanians will never forget the events that unfolded with Hurricane Agnes now 50 years ago. But going back to those memories while also looking into the advancements of technologies helps prepare us for the future.
Very important, and I want to thank Danielle, Braden, John, Allie, and you for joining us for this half-an-hour special program. Fox 43, WNEP sister stations teaming up to talk about Agnes and its impacts. Thanks for joining us, and have a great rest of the summer.